Soldier hit the gurney, still bleeding, still conscious, still trying to tell them something nobody wanted to hear. The metal fragment lodged 3 centimeters from his heart wasn't the problem. The problem was what Megan Calloway saw the moment she leaned in under the trauma lights, a machining mark so specific, so deliberate, that her hands went cold before her brain caught up. She had seen that exact pattern once before, in a classified briefing, in a file that was supposed to be buried, in a case that had destroyed her life and killed people she loved. And the doctor screaming at her to step back had absolutely no idea what was about to hit this hospital. If you've never seen one of these stories before, you're about to understand why people stay until the very last second. Subscribe to this channel right now, because what happens next in this story is exactly the kind of thing we do here. Hit the like button if you're already hooked, and drop a comment telling me what city and country you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Let's go. Call came in at 11:47 on a Tuesday night, which was already a bad sign. Trauma bays at Harwick Regional Medical Center in Fort Aldrin, Colorado didn't receive military casualties without warning. There were protocols for that: liaison officers, transfer documentation, carefully worded phone calls from base commanders who needed everything logged before anyone started cutting. What they did not get, not on a Tuesday night with the parking lot half frozen and the overnight staff running 2 nurses short, was a Black Hawk medevac dropping out of the sky onto the rooftop pad, with a Navy SEAL bleeding from a chest wound that nobody on the flight crew could fully explain. Megan Calloway was 3 hours into her shift when the alert fired. She was standing at the medication station, recapping a syringe she shouldn't have had to recap because the original order had been written wrong, and she had caught it before it reached the patient, which was exactly the kind of thing that made Dr. Carla Duvall describe her in Hallway the Conversations Megan was not supposed to overhear as a bottleneck in human form. Too careful, too slow, always finding problems that didn't need finding. Megan had heard variations of this for 4 years, and it had long since stopped landing with any particular force. She flagged the chart, capped the syringe, and was 3 steps from the nursing station when the overhead crackled. Trauma incoming. Military. Chest wound. Penetrating. ETA 4 minutes. She pulled her gloves from her scrub pocket and moved. The trauma bay at Harwick Regional was a long, rectangular room, with 3 stations separated by retractable curtain rails and a central supply cart that was never, under any circumstances, stocked in the correct order. Megan had reorganized it twice in 8 months and watched it descend back into chaos both times. She had stopped fighting that particular battle. Instead, she had memorized where everything actually ended up, which was more useful than arguing about where it was supposed to be. Pulled the chest tray without looking, checked the decompression needles by feel, confirmed the seal dates on the thoracostomy kit, and was setting up the second IV line when Dr. Carla Duvall walked in, already issuing instructions to no one in particular. What are we dealing with? Military male, late 20s to mid-30s. The charge nurse Paulette Ossie read from the incoming relay. Chest wound, penetrating. Foreign object still in situ. Flight crew is calling it a training accident. Training accident at midnight. Duvall snapped her gloves on with practiced efficiency. Sure. Who's on surgical? Dr. Farrow. He's been paged. Page him again, and I want imaging on standby. Duvall positioned herself at the head of the bay and ran through her mental checklist with the calm of someone who had done this 10,000 times. She was a competent physician, thorough, experienced, respected at Harwick, and before that, at 3 other trauma centers. Megan had never questioned that. What Duvall lacked was the specific capacity to believe that someone below her on the hierarchy might perceive something she had not. It wasn't malice. It was the particular blindness that develops when a system works well enough for long enough that outside input stops feeling like input and starts feeling like interference. That quality had created friction before. Tonight, it was going to create something more serious. The main doors crashed open. The gurney came through at speed, pushed by two flight medics, both talking simultaneously, their voices overlapping in the way voices do when people are trying to relay information faster than language permits. The patient was a large man, broad through the chest and shoulders, the build of someone who had spent years doing physical work that required carrying weight over long distances. He was conscious, which was notable, given the volume of blood visible on his flight suit, and he was fighting the oxygen mask with his right hand in the reflexive, angry way of someone who felt like it was adding to his problems rather than solving them. His left arm lay still at his side, with the particular stillness of a limb that hurt too much to move. Left subclavian involvement. Possible, the lead medic called, breathing hard. Vitals dropped twice in transit, once on departure, once about 8 minutes out. We packed the entry wound, but the object is still in there. We couldn't get a clear look at it. Time since injury? Duvall asked. 40 to 45 minutes. Blood products? 2 units whole blood in flight. He's been holding. Let's transfer. Everybody on the count. The room moved into its rhythm. Megan took the left side and helped with the board transfer, clean 3 count, patient across to the trauma mattress, without disturbing the packing or pulling the flight crew's fieldwork loose. She was already looking at the wound site before her hands finished settling. Field dressing was layered correctly. Military application. Someone who knew what they were doing had put it on. No arterial pumping visible through the outer layers. She would need to peel it back carefully. But something else caught her before she got there. There was a quality to the patient's breathing, a slight asymmetry on exhale, a lag on the left side, that was subtle enough to miss if you were watching the monitor of the patient instead of watching the patient. She moved her hand to the left chest wall and felt him breathe. Then she moved to the right side and compared. She looked at his neck, at the trachea, tracking its midline position. The deviation was barely started. 1 millimeter, maybe 2. But it was there and it was going to get worse. Oxygen sat? She said. 91, the monitor tech reported. Trending down. Portable chest, Duvall said, before we touch that wound. That's going to be 4 minutes, Megan said. Then it's 4 minutes. Duvall, I think he's building a tension pneumo. His trachea is beginning to deviate, and his left chest wall expansion is compromised. If we wait for imaging, and I'm right, we're going to be chasing it instead of ahead of it. Duvall didn't look up from the femoral pulse she was assessing. His SAT is 91. That's not a tension pneumo picture. The beginning of one, it'll look worse in 90 seconds. Megan. Duvall's voice carried the specific flatness of a sentence, cut off before it was finished. I've got this. Megan kept her hand on the patient's chest wall and counted his respiratory rate herself. But the depth was compromised on the left, shallow, guarded, as though full expansion triggered something specific rather than general pain. The neck veins were borderline distended in a pattern that didn't match simple hemorrhagic volume loss. She reached for the decompression needle on the tray. What are you doing? Paulette said quietly, not accusing her, just trying to get ahead of what was coming. If I'm correct, we have maybe 90 seconds before his pressure bottoms. Megan. Duvall looked up now. Full attention. Do not put that needle in this patient without my authorization. Pressure is dropping. The monitor tech said, 87/50. It just sat in the room and nobody spoke for a moment. Duvall looked at the monitor, then at the patient's chest, then at Megan. The pause was approximately 3 seconds and felt like considerably more. Go, Duvall said. Megan placed the needle's second intercostal space. Midclavicular line, clean angle, no hesitation. The rush of air that followed was immediate and audible, unmistakable, the kind of sound that ends a disagreement before it can fully form. The oxygen saturation began climbing. 30 seconds later, it was at 94. 45 seconds, 97. The left side of his chest wall opened up, and he took his first full breath in what had probably been 20 minutes. Nobody said anything. Duval said, "Good catch," with the economy of someone closing a file, and returned to the secondary Sully survey. The room exhaled and picked back up where it had been. Megan stayed left side. She began cutting away the flight suit with trauma shears along the seam, careful around the wound site, peeling back the heavy fabric to expose the field dressing underneath. Paulette was taping down the second IV line. Someone reported surgical was 3 minutes out. The monitor tech started calling vitals in a steadier rhythm now that the numbers were improving. She pulled the last layer of outer dressing away. The fragment was partially exposed at the wound channel, approximately 4 centimeters of dense gray metal, irregular, along one sheared edge where it had broken from something larger, smooth on the opposing face in the way that machined components are smooth. It had tumbled before impact. She could tell from the angle of entry. The medics had packed around it rather than over it, which was correct for an impaled object. The wound channel itself was approximately 2 centimeters wide at the surface, deeper than it looked. Megan leaned in. There was a pattern on the upper visible surface of the fragment. She nearly missed it. Microstriations, parallel lines at a very specific interval, finer than the eye caught on a casual pass, requiring the exact angle of light currently coming off the overhead trauma lamp. The lines were not random. They were not the product of fragmentation forces or shear stress or impact damage. They were a machining signature, a specific mark left by a specific tooling process. She had seen that signature before. Not in a medical context. Not in a nursing textbook or a trauma certification course or any of the continuing education she had accumulated over 4 years at Harwick Regional. She had seen it in a classified briefing held in a windowless room at a facility she was not permitted to name. 7 years ago, when she had been working under a different designation, doing work that had nothing to do with nursing. A weapons analyst had stood at the front of that room and walked through a series of photographs on a projector, and one of those photographs had shown a fragment with that exact pattern of microstriations, and the analyst had explained, in the precise and unhurried way of someone who had given this briefing multiple times, exactly what manufacturing process produced that mark, which specific network had access to it, and what that network had been building with it. Megan's hands stopped moving. She was aware of the sounds in the room monitors. Paulette's quiet instructions, the ventilator cycling in the adjacent bay, the distant intercom announcing something on the surgical floor. She was aware of all of it and heard none of it. She was back in that room, sitting in a metal chair in the third row, watching that projector image, and something cold moved through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the hospital. Megan. Paulette noticed the stillness first. She had a talent for that. "You with me?" Megan straightened. "Nobody touched this fragment," she said. Her voice came out quieter than she intended, and with something underneath it that she hadn't heard from herself in years. Quality that didn't belong in a trauma bay. "Excuse me?" Duval looked up sharply. The fragment. "I need everyone to stop handling this patient while I make one call." 60 seconds. The room didn't go silent, the machines kept running, but the human activity in it stopped in a wave, person by person, as the words registered. Duval set down the instrument she was holding. She set it down deliberately, which was a specific kind of warning from a person who moved quickly when she was simply occupied and carefully when she was managing herself. "Megan," she said, at a volume that was almost conversational, and therefore worse than if she had raised it. "This man is still bleeding. He has a foreign object in his chest cavity. He just came off a developing tension pneumo. He requires surgical intervention in the next several minutes, and you are asking me to stop." For 60 seconds. "Yes." "On what basis?" "On the basis of what I know about where that fragment came from." "And where is that?" "I can't tell you in this room." The silence that followed was the particular kind that builds when someone in authority is deciding between furious and genuinely uncertain and is landing definitively on furious. "Remove her from the bay," Duval said flatly. Paulette didn't move. "Dr. Duval, she is interfering with patient care. Get security and get her to the nursing station. And someone find Pharaoh. I don't care if he's still scrubbing. I want him in here now. You need to contact the bomb disposal unit at Keller Army Base," Megan said. Kept her voice level, controlled. The same register she would use to read a medication order. Their emergency operations line. Tell them you have a casualty present with fragments from a Class 7 modified device and that there may be additional devices at the incident site. "You are a nurse," Duval said. "You are my nurse. In my bay. And right now you are a problem I do not have time for. Step back from that patient." "The machining pattern on that fragment is a specific signature," Megan said. "It is not random fragmentation. It is not from a standard training munition. The people who manufactured that device have a documented history of placing multiple devices at a single target location. This man was at a training facility when this detonated. Megan. Duval stepped around the foot of the bed toward her. Her voice had dropped to the register people use when they have decided to be patient at significant cost, and they need you to understand what that cost is. "I do not know what is happening with you tonight. I do not know if this is a personal crisis or a breakdown or something else entirely. What I know is that there is a bleeding soldier on my table, and you are standing in the way of his care. So I am asking you one final time to step away from that patient and leave this bay." Patient turned his head. He did it slowly, against the weight of the oxygen mask and the pain moving through his chest. He turned his head and he looked directly at Megan. His eyes were dark, deep-set, the kind that had spent years squinting into bright outdoor light. He had a beard growing in unevenly from what had probably been a regulation cut 3 or 4 weeks ago. His face was drawn tight with pain and blood loss and the particular concentrated effort of staying conscious when your body is working hard to let you stop. But his eyes were tracking. They were clear and they were fixed on her with an attention that had nothing unfocused about it. He said nothing. Megan held his gaze. Then she said, low enough that it didn't carry past the two of them, "Were there other devices at the site?" His jaw moved, sir. She kept her voice at the same register. Quiet, direct. "Were there other devices at the location of this incident?" Security arrived one guard, the overnight staff, a young man who had clearly been hoping this shift would be unremarkable. He stopped at the curtain rail and assessed the situation with the expression of someone calculating how much authority he actually wanted to exercise. Paulette had stepped back from the IV line. The surgical resident was standing in the doorway behind the guard, having arrived at exactly the wrong moment, hovering in the uncertain way of someone who could read a room and had decided to wait for it to resolve. The patient raised his right hand, the one that had been fighting the oxygen mask. He lifted it from the mattress and moved it toward Megan's hand where it rested at the bedrail. Pressed 2 fingers against her wrist, not gripping, not grabbing, barely any pressure at all. Just contact, like a confirmation. And then he nodded. One small, deliberate movement that cost him something to make. Megan pulled her personal cell phone from her scrub pocket, stepped to the far corner of the trauma bay, not leaving, not being removed, just repositioning far enough that she wasn't in the immediate treatment corridor, and dialed a number she had committed to memory 7 years ago and never once erased. "Ma'am." The security guard moved toward her. "I need you to come with me." "One moment. Ma'am, Dr. Duval has asked." The call connected on the second ring. Keller Army Base Emergency Operations. "Sergeant Pruitt." Megan's voice shifted into a register she hadn't used in years. Clipped, direct, no preamble. "This is a civilian emergency call from Harwick Regional Medical Center, Fort Aldrin. You have a casualty at this facility, presenting with fragments consistent with a Class 7 modified device. I have strong reason to believe additional devices may be present at the incident location. I need you to initiate an immediate secondary sweep of wherever this man came from. Do not wait for an official request to come through channels. Tonight, a pause. Ma'am, who am I speaking with? Megan Calloway, trauma nurse, Harwick Regional. Longer pause. And how do you know about Class 7 classifications? She did not answer that. Please initiate the sweep, Sergeant. Right now. She ended the call and pocketed the phone. The security guard was standing 2 feet away, his hand partially extended, clearly unsure whether touching her was going to make things better or considerably worse. Duval was staring at her with an expression that had moved past fury into something harder, complicated, not quite uncertainty, but closer to it than anything Megan had seen on her face before. Paulette was watching the patient's monitor, with the intense focus of someone who needed something clinical to look at. You just made an unauthorized military call, Duval said. From inside an active trauma bay. Yes, using a patient in shock as your justification. He's conscious enough to respond to direct questions. He heard me, and he answered deliberately. That's not shock behavior. Megan kept her voice flat. Call is made. Whatever you want to do with me now, the call is made. Duval looked at her for a long moment. Something was running behind her eyes, a calculation she hadn't finished. Then she seemed to reach the end of it, and the conclusion didn't change her position. Get her out, Duval said. Now, and get Pharaoh in here. The security guard touched Megan's elbow, and she let him steer her toward the door, because fighting that specific battle in that specific moment would accomplish nothing, and she knew it. She was 3 steps from the exit, close enough to hear the door mechanism, when the main receiving doors opened from the other side. Not the staff entrance, not the security push doors on the north wall. Primary receiving doors that faced the ambulance bay, the ones that required a badge scan from outside, and were, under standard protocol, not accessible to anyone who hadn't been processed through intake. They opened anyway. 6 people came through. They moved the way people move when they have done this in many different rooms and know instinctively its insertexes, how to position themselves in a new one, fast entry, immediate spread, without any visible communication between them. 2 going left along the wall, 2 cutting toward the supply corridor on the right, the final 2 coming straight down the center. All 6 wore civilian clothing, dark jackets, tactical pants, boots that made a distinctive sound on the hospital tile that was entirely different from the soft-soled sound of medical staff. All 6 were carrying sidearms that they had not drawn but had made no effort to conceal beneath their jackets. Person at the front was a woman. She was Megan's approximate height, mid-40s, with dark hair pulled back tightly and a face that had spent significant time outdoors in conditions that were not recreational. No rank insignia anywhere on her. She held up a black federal credential wallet in her left hand, flipped it open long enough for the room to see the badge and the photograph, then folded it back and kept moving without slowing. Special Operations Command, attached federal investigation, she said, to the room at large. No one leaves this bay. Duval stepped forward. This is an active trauma. I understand that. Treatment continues. No one leaves. The woman's gaze moved to the patient on the table, and something shifted in her face, brief, controlled, the expression of someone who knew the person on the table and was choosing not to let that affect the next 60 seconds of her behavior. Marcus, you still with us? The patient made a sound. Not words, but something. Don't try to talk, she said. Then she turned and scanned the room, the systematic inventory of someone mapping a space. Her eyes moved from Paulette to the surgical resident, to the security guard, to Duval, and then they stopped. Stopped on Megan. You're the one who called Keller, she said. Statement, not question. Yes, Megan said. How did you identify the fragment? The radio on the belt of one of the other operators crackled before Megan could answer. Short, sharp military brevity code that Megan hadn't heard spoken in years. Her comprehension of it was immediate and automatic, the way fluency in a language never fully leaves, even when you've stopped speaking it. Every word of the transmission registered. The woman's posture changed, a small forward shift in weight, barely visible, the kind of physical tell that only appears when the information arriving is significantly worse than what you were prepared to receive. She keyed her own radio, received the repeat transmission, then looked at Megan again. The assessment in her eyes had changed quality. It was no longer just confirmation of the call. It was something more urgent. "We have a second device," she said. "Training facilities on base." She let the room absorb that. "And one of my people is standing directly beside it right now." Nobody moved for a full second. Then the woman she had not offered a name, and nobody had asked for, one turned to the operator nearest the wall and said, "Get Reston on the radio. Tell him do not touch anything. Tell him to back up 10 feet and wait." Her voice was flat and precise in the way voices get when the person using them is suppressing the urge to move faster than the situation allows. The operator had his radio up before she finished the sentence. Megan was still standing near the door with the security guard's hand on her elbow. She had stopped walking. The guard had stopped trying to move her. Everyone in the room seemed to have collectively agreed, without discussing it, that the geometry of the moment had changed. "You," the woman said, looking at Megan. "Come here." Duval stepped forward. "She is a member of my staff, and she is not going anywhere with Dr. Duval." The woman looked at her directly for the first time. "I have read your facility profile, and I know who you are. With respect, I'm not asking your staff member to leave the building. I am asking her to stand 3 feet to the left. Please." The last word was not quite a courtesy. It was a boundary, described politely. Duval held the look for a moment, then stepped back. Megan crossed the bay to where the woman was standing near the trauma table. Up close, the woman had a small scar along her jaw, old, well-healed, and the particular stillness of someone accustomed to functioning at high stress without broadcasting it. "What did you see on the fragment?" the woman said, low enough that it didn't carry to the far end of the room. "A machining signature," Megan said, microstriations at a specific interval along the upper face. Consistent with a modified manufacturing process used by a network that was active 7 years ago. The woman looked at her for a moment without speaking. "And you know that how? I was briefed on it." "Where?" Megan said nothing. Something shifted in the woman's expression. Not surprise exactly. More like confirmation of a suspicion she'd formed in the last 90 seconds. She looked at Megan the way you look at a door you thought was locked, when it turns out it will open the whole time. "What's your background?" the woman said. "I'm a trauma nurse." Before that, Megan looked at the patient on the table, Marcus. The woman had called him and said, "Army medic." The woman waited. She was good at waiting. "Attached to a military intelligence unit," Megan said. "For 3 years. Before I separated." "Which unit?" "I think you probably know which unit," Megan said quietly. "Or you're going to find out in the next 20 minutes. Either way, the more important question right now is whether your person at the training facility is standing exactly where you told them to stand." The radio crackled. The operator near the wall relayed in clipped phrases. Reston had backed off. Device was visible. No triggering event detected yet. EOD was 18 minutes out. 18 minutes. Megan looked at the fragment in the patient's chest and felt the number settle into her with a weight she recognized. 18 minutes was a long time. It was also not a long time at all, depending on what kind of device it was, and she had a very specific idea of what kind of device it was. "What do you know about the construction?" the woman asked. "Potentially a lot," Megan said, "but I need to see the device. It's at a military training facility 12 minutes from here. Then I need someone to describe it to me, in detail. Right now." Duval's voice came from across the bay. "Can someone please tell me what is happening in my trauma bay so that I can continue treating my patient. Nobody answered her immediately, which was its own kind of answer. The surgical resident, Dr. Farrow, had apparently materialized at some point in the last several minutes. A tall, thin man in his late 30s with the slightly bewildered look of someone who had been fully asleep 40 minutes ago was already at the table assessing the wound. He glanced at the fragment with professional concern and said nothing. The woman made a decision. Megan could see it happen, a visible shift from assessing to committing. Kellerman, she said to one of the operators who had positioned near the supply corridor, "Get me the feed from the facility cam now." Kellerman produced a tablet. 30 seconds later, there was a live image on the screen, grainy, from a mounted camera at what looked like an indoor training range, approximately 30 yards, showing before the image quality degraded. In the center of the frame, partially obscured by a support column, was a shape on the floor. Megan leaned in. It was wrapped in a heavy canvas material with metallic grommets, partially unfurled at one end, with a visible component cluster at the exposed terminus. She could see 2 cylinders, a flat rectangular housing, and what looked like a pressure plate assembly seated at a slight angle. She looked at it for 12 seconds. "That's not a commercial IED," she said. "Pressure plate is a secondary trigger, not the primary. The primary is the rectangular housing. That's where the initiator is. Your person stepped back 10 feet in the direction of the camera. They stepped back toward the pressure plate, not away from it." The woman looked at the screen, then at Megan. "You're certain?" "I'm not certain of anything. But that assembly configuration matches a specific design type I was briefed on. Pressure plate has a threshold delay. It doesn't trigger on initial contact weight. It triggers on sustained contact above a threshold held for more than 3 seconds. So if Reston walked back and stopped, he's probably fine. Kept moving, shifted his weight, or if anyone else has walked into that frame in the last 2 minutes." "Kellerman," the woman said. "Already on it." Kellerman was on the radio, relaying in fragments, clipped and fast. The room held its breath in segments. Doctor. Farrow was working on Marcus, speaking quietly to this grub tech, methodical in the way surgeons are methodical when they are concentrating hard and pretending they are not listening to everything happening around them. Paulette was checking vitals. Duval had moved to the foot of the bed and was watching the federal personnel with an expression that had evolved from outrage to something more carefully neutral. The radio came back. Reston was listening. No additional personnel in the frame. EOD revised to 16 minutes. Megan exhaled. "He needs to stay exactly where he is," she said. "Tell your EOD team, when they arrive, that the pressure plate is the decoy. They need to approach from the north side of the device if they're looking at it from the camera angle, which means coming in from the left side of that support column. If they approach straight on, they're crossing the plate's activation field. How wide is the field? Based on that housing size. Probably 2 meters. Maybe 2.5. The woman looked at her steadily. "You're asking me to relay instructions from a trauma nurse to a military EOD team about how to approach an active device. I'm asking you to relay information from someone who has seen this design before to people who haven't," Megan said. "Call it what you want." Another beat. The woman picked up the radio herself. Megan turned back to the patient. Marcus was still conscious. He had improved since the needle decompression. His color was better, his breathing more regular, and Dr. Farrow had begun the careful process of assessing the fragment for surgical extraction. Megan moved back to the left side of the table and looked at the wound site, at the fragment angle, at the depth of the wound channel. "I need to look at something," she said to Farrow. He glanced at her sideways. "Who are you?" "Trauma nurse. I've been working this patient since admission." "And the federal people?" "That's a separate conversation. Can I look at the fragment for a moment?" Farrow stepped back 18 inches, which was as much deference as he was apparently willing to offer. Megan leaned in with a penlight angling the beam to catch a different fragment from a different direction than the overhead trauma light. She was looking at the embedded portion, specifically at where the metal disappeared into the wound channel. There was something she had noticed earlier and filed away and now needed to look at directly. The fragment was oriented at an angle that suggested it had been traveling along a specific vector when it impacted not the random tumble of a fragmentation blast, but something more directed. A shape charge. A device designed to project a specific pattern of fragments in a specific direction rather than omnidirectional detonation. Which meant the device that wounded Marcus had been placed, not incidentally detonated. It had been positioned with an intent to target a specific person or location. She stood up. This wasn't a training accident, she said, to no one in particular, and everyone simultaneously. Duval said from across the bay, "We established that." "No," Megan said. "What I mean is the device was directional. This isn't incidental fragmentation. He was the target, specifically him, or specifically the location he was standing in." She looked at the woman. "Who else was at the facility tonight?" The woman looked at her for a moment. "His team." "How many?" "4 others." "Are they all accounted for?" Something moved across the woman's face. Not quite the expression of someone receiving new information, more like someone who had been avoiding a specific question and had just been asked it directly. She turned to one of her operators and said, "Get me a status on the rest of Harker team. All 4 now." Kellerman had his radio up. There was a short exchange Megan couldn't fully follow. Then a longer pause than there should have been, and then a relay back that made Kellerman go still for a moment before he turned to the woman and said, "Voss is unaccounted for." The woman said nothing. "Voss went back to retrieve equipment from the secondary range," Kellerman said. "About 20 minutes before the first device detonated. Nobody has been able to raise him since. The secondary range." Megan looked at the tablet with the facility camera feed. The image showed the main training range. She had been assuming the second device was the only other device. "How many ranges does this facility have?" she said. 3, the woman said. "Have you swept all 3? Pause that followed was answer enough. The woman turned to the room and said, "Kellerman, get base command on the line right now. I need a full structural sweep of all 3 ranges and every adjacent corridor. Full team." She looked at Megan. "If there are 3 devices." "Then this isn't a warning," Megan said. "It's an extermination." She said it plainly, without drama, because it was a plain and factual assessment. The woman across from her seemed to understand it the same way. Marcus made a sound from the table. Farrow told him to stay still. Marcus ignored Farrow and looked at Megan again with those focused, too alert eyes. She leaned in. "Voss," he said. His voice was rough and thin, pushed through significant pain and a compromised chest. Secondary range. He was checking something. Checking what? Equipment malfunction. During the training run, something went wrong with the setup. He stopped, breathed carefully. He thought it was just a misfire. "A misfire," Megan repeated. "Blank cartridge," they thought. He went back to clear it. A blank cartridge misfire at a secondary range 20 minutes before the first device detonated. Megan thought about that for 2 seconds. A misfire that wasn't a misfire. A device designed to bring one person back to a specific location. A second device on standby. A third range, unstated. "The misfire was bait," she said. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he gave her the smallest nod, which appeared to cost him a significant amount. The woman was already on her radio, her voice clipped and rapid. Kellerman was on a second line simultaneously. The other operators had repositioned toward the main doors, and Megan could hear the quality of the transmissions changing as more personnel came online at the base end. Dr. Farrow said, with the practiced patience of someone who had been trying to do his job for the last 10 minutes while a federal operation conducted itself around his operating table, "I need to take this patient to surgery." I need to take him in the next 20 minutes, and I need this room cleared to a manageable number of people. The woman looked at Pharaoh and said, "He goes to surgery." Nobody stops that. Then she looked at her team. "Kellerman, go. Take Yates with you. I want eyes on that secondary range before EOD gets there." She looked at the remaining two operators. "Hayes, Morales stay on this floor." Then she looked at Megan. "You're coming with me," she said. Duval stepped forward. "She is my staff." "She's off shift," the woman said. "As of right now. If you have a problem with that, call your hospital administrator." "I'll wait." She was already moving toward the door. She looked back at Megan. "You coming?" Megan looked at Marcus on the table, at Paulette, who was watching her with an expression that said several things simultaneously, at Duval, whose expression said fewer things but said them more loudly. She looked at the fragment still sitting in the wound site, tagged now for surgical removal, that small piece of gray metal that had started all of this. "Yeah," she said. "I'm coming." She followed the woman through the main doors and into the corridor beyond. The hospital at midnight had a specific quality of emptiness, not absence, exactly, but reduced. Fluorescent lighting on a dimmer cycle, the distant movement of staff on the far end of the hall, the mechanical regularity of machines behind closed doors. The woman moved fast, without appearing to hurry, which was a skill, and Megan matched her pace without difficulty, which told the woman something, though neither of them acknowledged it. "Your name?" the woman said, not looking at her. "Megan Calloway." "I mean your other name." Megan didn't answer immediately. They were passing the elevator bank, heading toward a side exit. She assumed the woman's team had already identified on entry. "Specialist Megan Rourke," she said. That was the designation. A long time ago, the woman pushed through the side exit door into the cold. The air outside was sharp and dry, Colorado winter at elevation, and their breath came out visible in the parking lot lighting. One of the team's vehicles was positioned near the exit, a dark SUV, engine running. Kellerman and the operator she'd called Yates were already in the front. "I'm Commander Dana Vera," the woman said, "and I know who you are, Specialist Rourke. We pulled your file in the 20 minutes between Sergeant Pruitt's call and us getting to the hospital." She opened the rear door. "Get in." Megan got in. The vehicle moved before the door fully closed. Kellerman drove with the matter-of-fact aggression of someone accustomed to needing to be somewhere faster than traffic preferred. The base was 12 minutes away, under normal conditions. At this speed, and with Kellerman treating yellow lights as a personal insult, it would be less. "Talk to me about the design type," Vera said. She was in the front passenger seat, turned partially toward Megan in the back. "You said you'd been briefed on it." 7 years ago, Megan said. "I was attached to a unit running interference on a weapons supply network operating in a particular region. We identified a specific manufacturing signature on devices recovered from 3 separate incidents. The signature matched a contractor network, not state actors, not a militia. Private. Commercial-grade manufacturing access adapted for weapons-grade output. What was the network? I didn't have a name for them then. We had a file reference. The devices were being sold, not ideologically motivated, strictly transactional. Whoever had the money got the hardware. And the specific design? Directional fragmentation, charged with a secondary delayed trigger. The delay was the signature. Most IEDs are designed to detonate on contact or on command. This network built in a timing delay on secondary triggers, specifically to allow an initial detonation to draw responders before the secondary activated. She paused. The first device doesn't kill the target. It draws the team. Secondary device kills the team. Vera was quiet for a moment. Outside, the road had opened up past the city limits, heading toward the base perimeter, and Kellerman was doing something genuinely inadvisable with the accelerator. So the device that hit Marcus, Vera said, drew his team to respond. Drew Voss back to the secondary range. potentially drew EOD and base security into a pattern that someone mapped in advance. You're describing a coordinated kill sequence. I'm describing what the design type is used for, Megan said. Whether that's what's happening here, I don't know. The fragment in Marcus's chest matches the design profile exactly. Same machining signature, same construction logic. 7 years ago, Vera said. And you think the same network is operating now? I think the same tooling produced that fragment, whether it's the same people or someone who acquired their manufacturing process. I don't know. Vera turned to face forward. She was quiet for 30 seconds, which in the context of a fast-moving vehicle approaching an active device situation was a significant 30 seconds. Then she said, "The operation you were attached to. What happened to it?" Megan looked at the passing dark of the road outside. It ended badly. How badly? 4 soldiers died, Megan said. A 5th was critically injured. The intelligence report I submitted was reviewed, classified, and then quietly set aside. The official determination was that the operation failed due to a field error in the intelligence assessment. She kept her voice even. My assessment. Vera turned back to look at her. Was it? No, Megan said. It was not. The vehicle pulled hard through the base perimeter entrance. The guards had been pre-cleared. The gate was already up, and Kellerman was on the radio again, getting updated coordinates from the base operations center. It's like training facility was on the north side of the base, a cluster of low buildings surrounded by a cleared perimeter, currently lit up with base security vehicles, and at the far end, the blinking lights of an EOD unit truck that had arrived in the last several minutes. They stopped at the outer perimeter of the cleared zone. Vera was out of the vehicle before it fully stopped, and Megan was half a step behind her. Cold here was sharper than in the city, the wind coming across open ground without anything to break it. Megan's scrubs were inadequate for it, but she didn't feel the cold in any way that registered as a problem. There were too many other things registering. A military EOD technician in a partial blast suit met them at the perimeter line. He was young, late 20s, with the slightly hyperventilated energy of someone doing a job they had trained for extensively and were now doing for real for the first time. "Commander Vera," he said. "Technician Aldridge. We have eyes on the device in range 1. My team is holding at the approach boundary. We have not begun any intervention." "What about Reston?" Vera said. "Your man is out." He exited via the north corridor. "He's with base security." Something in Vera's shoulders shifted. "Not much." "Good. What about the second range?" Aldridge looked less comfortable. "We have a second object in range 2. Different configuration. My team lead is saying it doesn't match the range 1 device. He's not sure what he's looking at." "What about the third range?" "Sweep in progress. Nothing confirmed yet." Megan stepped forward. "Can I see the range 2 object?" Aldridge looked at her, then at Vera. "She's with me," Vera said. Aldridge looked at Megan's scrubs, at her hospital ID badge still clipped to her pocket, at her complete absence of any protective equipment. "Ma'am, if you're going to approach..." "I'm not approaching it," Megan said. "I need to see it. Camera feed, a monitor, someone who can describe it to me in detail. Whatever you have." Aldridge led them to the EOD truck. Inside, 2 technicians were monitoring feeds from 6 cameras positioned throughout the facility. The range 2 feed was on the upper right screen. Megan looked at it. This device was different. The canvas wrap was gone. The range 2 object was partially concealed beneath a storage rack, a low metal shelving unit bolted to the wall, and visible only because one of the cameras had a high enough angle to see underneath it. It was smaller than the range 1 device, compact. Component cluster was tighter, and she could see something on the face of the housing that she hadn't expected. A timer display. It was not counting down. It was not counting up. It was showing a static number, which was either a malfunction, a deception, or something she hadn't seen before and didn't fully understand. "How long has that Display been showing the same number, she said to the nearest technician. He checked his log. Since we first got camera on it. About 11 minutes ago. It hasn't changed. A timer that wasn't running. She thought about that. A timer that wasn't running on a device that was clearly armed, because unarmed devices didn't have active displays showing anything. She thought about what she knew about this network's construction philosophy. The delay trigger. The design logic built around drawing responders in rather than simply detonating. Static timer display. It wasn't a malfunction. It wasn't decorative. It was a trigger condition. The timer wasn't counting down from a set time. It was waiting for an input. Something that, when it happened, would start the clock, and the clock would be short. Very short, if the range 1 design was the reference point. Something in this facility is going to trigger that timer, she said. When it triggers, you'll have a very small window. Minutes, maybe less. Aldridge's team lead a stockier man in his 40s cape. Sarge Wicks by his name tape looked at her from across the truck. And what triggers it? I don't know exactly. But based on the range 1 device, it's probably something that looks routine. Something responders would do automatically. She looked at the feed storage rack, at the positioning of the device beneath it, angled toward the door. Is there a light switch near the entrance to range 2? Said, yeah. Standard panel, left side of the door. Has anyone turned the range lights on since you've been here? Wicks went still. We came in on emergency lighting, he said slowly. We haven't touched the main panels. Don't, Megan said. The light switch is probably the trigger input. The truck went quiet. Aldridge was staring at her. Wicks was staring at her. Vera was standing at the truck entrance, watching all of it. Wicks, Vera said. Get on base command and tell them nobody touches any electrical panel in that building until we've swept every circuit. Yes, ma'am. And get me confirmation on the 3rd range. Wicks was already on the radio. Megan was still looking at the screen, at the static number on the timer display, at the angle of the device beneath the rack, positioning logic of someone who had designed all of this with careful attention to how responders move through unfamiliar spaces. This wasn't opportunistic. It wasn't reactive. Someone had mapped this facility, had known the layout, the light panel positions, the training schedule, the movement patterns of the specific team that trained here, had designed 3 devices to operate in sequence, using each detonation and each response to set up the next. She thought about the machining signature, about the briefing 7 years ago, about the 4 soldiers who had died and the report she had submitted that had been quietly buried. Someone had spent years building toward this. Wicks came back from the radio, with his face arranged in the neutral expression of someone delivering news they do not like. He looked at Vera. 3rd range is clear, he said. Vera nodded. Good. But we found something in the access corridor between range 2 and the equipment storage building. He paused. Phone. Prepaid. It's been wiped except for 1 item. Photograph. Of what? Vera said. Wicks looked at Megan. Of her, he said. The photograph was taken from a distance. Megan could see that much from where she stood, looking at the image on Wicks's tablet, a long lens shot, slightly compressed, the way telephoto images are, with the depth of field narrowed so that the background was a soft blur and only the subject was sharp. The subject was her. She was in scrubs, walking to her car, and the angle suggested the shot had been taken from above and to the left, probably from the upper level of the parking structure adjacent to Harwick Regional. Timestamp embedded in the image metadata read 6 days ago. She had parked in that structure on that shift. She remembered it because she'd had to circle twice to find a space and had been mildly irritated about it. Nobody said anything in the truck for a moment. Then Vera said, "When was this phone placed in the corridor?" Wicks shook his head. The facilities logs the access door. Last legitimate entry was 1400 hours today. Base maintenance. 2 personnel. Routine check. After that, the door wasn't touched until my team came through it 40 minutes ago. So someone was inside this facility between 2 in the afternoon and whatever time my team arrived tonight. Yes, ma'am. Vera looked at Megan. The look was not unfriendly, but it was direct in the way that looks are direct when someone is revising their understanding of a situation in real time. How long have you been at Harwick Regional? 4 years, Megan said. And before that, 2 years at a VA clinic in Pueblo. Before that, the transition period, after I separated from service. And nobody has contacted you in the last 4 years? Nobody from your previous unit, from any intelligence context. Nothing that felt out of place. Megan thought about it, honestly, because this was not a moment for quick answers. No, she said, nothing. But someone has been watching you for at least 6 days. Apparently. And they left a photograph of you at a site where a coordinated attack was carried out against a special operations team. Vera's voice was measured, which suggests that either you are the target or you are the message. Megan had already been thinking along those lines. Or both, she said. Vera took the tablet from Wix and looked at the photograph again. Something in the set of her jaw changed, a tightening that suggested she was working through something she didn't want to work through. The unit you were attached to, she said, 7 years ago. Operation that ended badly. Was there anyone connected to that network who would have known you were involved? The intelligence was compartmentalized, Megan said. I was one of 3 analysts with direct access to the manufacturing signature identification. The report was classified and then suppressed. She paused. But if someone had someone with enough clearance to classified suppressed report, Vera said, would also have enough access to your service record, your separation, your current posting. She set the tablet down. This is not random. No, Megan said, it's not. Wix cleared his throat. Commander, EOD is ready to approach range 1. My team lead is requesting a go. Vera looked at Megan. The approach vector you described. North side of the device, left of the support column. That's my best assessment based on the camera image, Megan said. EOD should trust their own eyes when they're in the room. I'm working from a grainy feed, noted. Vera turned to Wix. Tell your team lead approach from the north. Do not approach straight on under any circumstances. And tell him there may be a secondary trigger configured to activate on electrical input, so nobody touches any switches or panels inside that building until the device is neutralized. Yes, ma'am. Wix relayed the instructions. Megan watched the Range 1 camera feed as EOD's approach began 2 technicians in full blast suits moving into the frame from the upper left corner, exactly where she had said to enter. Their progress, slow and deliberate, in the practiced way of people who had learned that patience was not a choice but a survival mechanism. She watched them move and felt the specific tension of someone who has given advice they cannot take back and must now wait to see if they were right. The Range 2 timer display was still static on the upper right screen. Same number, unchanged, waiting. The Range 1 approach took 9 minutes. Megan knew because she counted. She also knew because she had stopped breathing properly somewhere around minute 4 and had to deliberately remind herself to do it. The EOD technicians reached the device, ran their assessment with a handheld scanner, communicated in fragments over the radio, and then began the neutralization sequence. At minute 7, one of the technicians stepped slightly to his right to reposition, and Megan saw it before she could say anything, saw his right foot come within 18 inches of what looked like a floor seam, but wasn't. Tell him to stop moving his right foot, she said to Wix. Wix looked at her now. Right now. Wix keyed the radio. Aldridge, tell your man to freeze his right foot. Do not move it. A pause. Then Aldridge's voice came back, tight. Why? There may be a pressure element at his 2 o'clock, floor level. Another pause. Then the feed showed the technician going absolutely still. His partner moved to scan the floor near his foot with a secondary device. 30 seconds later, the radio crackled. Confirmed, Aldridge said. Secondary pressure element, floor mounted. We missed it on initial scan. The truck was quiet again. Wicks looked at Megan with an expression that had no category she could easily name. Vera was watching her from the truck entrance with the same unreadable assessment she'd had since the trauma bay. How did you see that? Wicks said. The floor seam pattern in that range is uniform, except for one section about 2 feet to the right of the support column, Megan said. I was watching the feed. The seam spacing is different there. Slightly. You'd have to be looking at the floor specifically to catch it. You were looking at the floor. I was looking at everything. Aldridge's team neutralized the primary device at minute 9. Second Seetsaby, the secondary pressure element, took an additional 4 minutes and required a different approach. When the all-clear came through on the Range 1 device, several people in the truck exhaled at the same time, and the collective exhale was loud enough that it was almost embarrassing. Then the Range 2 timer display changed. Everyone saw it simultaneously. The static number, which had been sitting unchanged for 23 minutes, flickered, and then began moving. Not counting down, counting up, rapidly, like a timer that had been paused and had just been released. What triggered it? Vera said sharply. The Range 1 neutralization, Megan said. She had already understood it before she finished saying it. The devices are linked. Neutralizing the first one released the second. Wicks was on the radio in under 2 seconds, his voice abandoning its measured quality and going flat and fast. Aldridge, get your people out of the Range 1 corridor now. Range 2 device is activated. I repeat, Range 2 device is activated. Timer was climbing. How long do we have? Vera said. Megan said, I've never seen this variant. Estimate. She looked at the housing size, the component cluster, the positioning. 3 minutes, maybe 4, not more. Vera turned to Wicks. Can your team approach Range 2 in 3 minutes? Not in blast suits, Wicks said. Not safely. What about without them? Wicks looked at her. Commander, I'm asking a factual question. Without suits, yes. They can reach it in 90 seconds from their current position. But if they're wrong about anything, I know what happens if they're wrong. Vera looked at Megan. The light switch trigger you identified. If that's the primary input and it hasn't been activated. The timer overrides it now, Megan said. The light switch was the initialization trigger. Been bypassed by the linked detonation from Range 1. Whatever window we had for that approach is gone. Vera processed this in approximately 2 seconds. So the device is now running on its own clock. Yes. And your best estimate is 3 to 4 minutes. Yes. An EOD can reach it in 90 seconds without suits. Yes. Then they need to go now, Verissa said. She looked at Wicks. Your call, Sergeant? It's your team. Wicks had the radio up before she finished. He spoke to Aldridge in short-clipped phrases. There was a pause on the other end that lasted about 4 seconds, which was exactly the length of time a person needs to make a decision they cannot unmake. Then Aldridge said yes. Megan watched the feed. 2 figures moved into the range, 2 frame without blast suits, just tactical clothing, moving fast, and she felt the specific nausea of watching other people carry the weight of information she had provided. She looked at the timer. It had been climbing for 1 minute and 40 seconds. They need to approach from the left side of the rack, she said. Not from the front. The device is angled toward the door. The fragmentation pattern would project toward anyone approaching straight on. Wicks relayed it. On the feed, the 2 figures adjusted their angle, coming in from the left. They reached the rack. The timer had been climbing for 2 minutes and 15 seconds. The radio stayed open. Megan could hear breathing fast, controlled, professional. Could hear the specific sounds of people working in close proximity to something that could kill them. The particular quality of movement when every action is deliberate and nothing is rushed, even though everything is urgent. 2 minutes and 50 seconds. Housing is different from Range 1. Aldridge said over the radio, tight but clear. Different initiator type. I need a pause. I need 30 seconds. 3 minutes and 10 seconds. Take them, Wicks said. The truck was silent, except for the radio feed and the ambient sound of equipment running. Megan was looking at the screen, and not looking at Vera, and not looking at Wicks, and not looking at anything except the two figures at the bottom left of the frame, moving with the careful urgency of people who had exactly the skills required for this moment and were using all of them. 3 minutes and 40 seconds. A sound on the radio. Not an explosion. Something smaller, a click, a depressurization, a mechanical release, and then Aldridge's voice. Device is cold, he said. Range 2 is clear. Wicks closed his for approximately 1 second. Then he opened them and began issuing follow-up instructions, and the truck filled again with the sound of coordinated military activity. Everyone returning to their functions with the particular efficiency of people whose adrenaline has peaked and is now looking for somewhere useful to go. Megan sat down on the bench seat inside the truck because her legs had made a decision that she hadn't been consulted about. Vera crouched in front of her. She didn't touch her, didn't offer anything performative. She just looked at her at eye level. You okay? Yes, Megan said. It was approximately 60% true. You've been right about everything tonight. I've been right about the things I could see, Megan said. There's still a lot I can't see. Vera nodded. She stood, looked at the screens for a moment, then turned back. I need to brief my command, and we need to have a longer conversation about your previous unit and the op you were attached to. Not here. She looked at Wicks. Get a vehicle to take her back to the hospital. And I want 2 of my people with her. I don't need... Megan started. Someone left a photograph of you at this facility tonight, Vera said. Until I understand why, you have 2 of my people with you. That's not a discussion. Megan looked at her. And Marcus? Marcus is in surgery. Dr. Farrow said he'd be in there for at least 3 hours. Vera paused. He's going to make it. Farrow told me that before we left the hospital. I should have said it sooner. Megan nodded. She hadn't known she needed to hear that until she did. The ride back to Harwick Regional took 14 minutes. Megan spent most of it looking out the window at the dark road and the scattered lights of Fort Aldrin and trying to do the thing she had not done in 7 years, which was think directly and honestly about what had happened during that operation and who had known enough about it to do what had been done tonight. The unit she had been attached to was called the 114th Field Intelligence Support Element. 6 personnel total, 3 analysts, including herself, and 3 field coordinators. The operation designated internally as Casket Run, which she had always thought was an unnecessarily bleak name, had targeted a weapons supply network moving modified devices through a civilian logistics chain. She had been the one to identify the manufacturing signature. She had been the one who put together the distribution map. She had submitted a report recommending a specific intervention window, a specific location, and a specific approach. The intervention had gone wrong in a way that looked, in the official record, like a bad intelligence call. 4 people had died. The official determination had named her assessment as the critical failure point. The report she had submitted had been reviewed, marked with a classic upgrade, and then effectively disappeared from the active file. She had been separated from the unit with a service record that listed her performance as satisfactory, not bad enough to warrant formal action, not good enough to suggest anything worth preserving. She had understood, at the time, that something was wrong with the official account. She had not had the evidence or the standing to say so. She had left the Army, gone to nursing school, and spent 4 years at Harwick Regional being the nurse who asked too many questions. The vehicle pulled into the hospital lot. The 2 operators, Hayes and Morales, she had learned their names during the ride. Hayes talking, and Morales mostly not flanked her on the walk from the parking lot to the side entrance. Professional without being aggressive. They had done this before. Inside the hospital had the particular changed quality of a place that has experienced something significant and is now processing it. Two of Vera's other personnel were still on the trauma floor. The nursing station had twice the usual number of staff gathered around it, the night shift having experienced considerably more than they had contracted for. Paulette was still there, it was. Past her shift end, she had clearly chosen not to leave, and when she saw Megan come through the side entrance with two federal operators, she walked directly to her. "Marcus is in surgery," Megan said before Paulette could ask. "He's going to make it." Paulette let out a breath. "Duval wants to talk to you." "Of course she does. She's in her office. She's been there for about 40 minutes. Paulette paused. She's not as angry as she usually is, which is somehow worse. Megan told Hayes and Morales she'd be in the trauma director's office and that they were welcome to stand outside it. Hayes said that was acceptable. Morales said nothing, which she was beginning to understand was simply his communication style. Duval's office was at the end of the trauma floor corridor, past the family waiting area and the supply room. The light was on. The door was half open. Megan knocked on the frame. "Come in," Duval said. Duval was sitting behind her desk, but not in the way she usually sat behind her desk, which was forward-leaning and kinetic, always in the process of doing something. She was sitting back. Her hands were flat on the surface. She looked like someone who had been sitting quietly for a while and hadn't found it particularly restful. Megan sat down in the chair across from her, without being invited. Duval noticed this, but didn't say anything about it. The base called, Duval said. "About 20 minutes ago. Colonel Ashford. He told me there had been multiple devices at the training facility, that 2 had been neutralized, and that a member of my nursing staff had provided critical intelligence support to the EOD response." She paused. "He said that without your input, there was a significant probability that at least one of those devices would have detonated with personnel in proximity." Megan said nothing. "I told him that was very interesting," Duval said. "And then I sat here." She looked at Megan. "Who are you?" It was not the hostile version of the question. It was the version that comes from genuine recalibration. "I'm a trauma nurse," Megan said. That part was always true. Before that, Army medic, attached to an intelligence unit, with knowledge of military explosive device design. Exposure to a specific case involving a specific design type. Yes, Duval was quiet for a moment, the fragment. When you looked at it and stopped moving, you knew immediately. "I recognized the pattern," Megan said. "I wasn't certain. But I was certain enough. And I told you to leave." "Yes, I told you to stay in your lane." Duval said this without any particular inflection, as if reading it off a surface. "I had security trying to remove you. You didn't know," Megan said. "You couldn't have known. You made the call that made sense with the information you had." Duval looked at her with an expression that suggested she did not find this exculpatory. "I have been a trauma director for 11 years, she said. "And in 11 years, I have told nurses to stay in their lane." She stopped. Started again. "I have a practice of dismissing some concerns that slow the bay down. Because the bay needs to move. That's not wrong." But she stopped again. "It's a balance," Megan said. "It's a problem," Duval said flatly. "When the concern is legitimate and I don't know the difference, it's a problem." She looked at her hands on the desk. "Tension pneumo. You caught it before I did. I was positioned to see it first." Megan. "Yes," Megan said. "I caught it first. And the fragment." "Yes." Duval nodded slowly, like someone agreeing to terms they had spent some time negotiating with themselves. "You should have told me," she said. "About your background." "Which part?" "Any of it. Some of it." She paused. "The part that was relevant to the work. It's a hard thing to explain to someone who is ordrit to explain certain they know who you are," Megan said. Duval looked at her for a long moment. It was the look of someone receiving something accurate, delivered without aggression, which is harder to respond to than criticism. She nodded once. All right, she said. I'll accept that. She shifted in her chair. What happens now with the federal investigation? I don't know exactly. Commander Vera said she wants to have a longer conversation. Megan paused. There's something from my past that seems to be connected to what happened tonight. They'll need to go through it. How connected? I don't know yet. More than I'd like. Duval studied her. Are you in danger? Megan considered the photograph on the prepaid phone taken 6 days ago. From the parking structure, a patient and deliberate act of surveillance, and said, someone has been watching me. So possibly. Duval looked at the two shapes visible through the frosted glass of her office door, Hayes and Morales, standing at appropriate distance, and something shifted in her expression. The clinical calculation that lived permanently behind her eyes was running, but softer than usual. You can take whatever time you need, she said, from shifts. Whatever this requires. I appreciate that. And Megan. Duval paused. I owe you an apology, not just for tonight, for a pattern of behavior that tonight made very visible. She said it the way a person says something they have rehearsed because they needed to rehearse it to say it right. I'll be thinking about how to do that properly. Megan stood. Tonight is enough for now. She went back into the corridor. Hayes and Morales fell in at a respectful distance behind her. She walked to the nursing station, got herself a cup of the terrible overnight coffee from the station pot, and stood at the window that looked out over the ambulance bay. The lot was quiet. The cold was visible in the way the air looked under the lot lights, crisp, dry, everything sharply defined. Her phone buzzed. Vera's number. She had given to Megan her direct line before the vehicle left the base. She answered. We ran the photograph, Vera said. She did not begin with preamble. The metadata traces to a specific device, a camera registered to a corporate entity that dissolved 8 months ago. Corporate entity traces back through 2 shell structures to a defense contractor registered in Delaware. Megan waited. The contractor's primary registered officer, Vera said, is a man named Victor Rains. The name moved through Megan like something cold and specific. She had not heard it in 7 years. She had thought about it in the first year, after separation had turned it over in her mind with the repetitive quality of something she couldn't put down, and had then deliberately stopped. She had made a project of not thinking about Victor Rains, because thinking about Victor Rains led to thinking about the operation. And thinking about the operation led to 4 names on a list that she could not change and could not accept and could not keep living inside. You know that name, Vera said. Yes, Megan said. Tell me. He was a defense contractor with access to the intelligence community's procurement channels, Megan said. Her voice had found the flat, factual register again, the one that kept the other thing from getting into the words. During the casket run operation, we identified a procurement irregularity, military-grade components being diverted from legitimate contracts into a secondary supply chain. The secondary chain was feeding the network we were targeting. She paused. Put Rains in my report. I named him specifically. I identified the diversion mechanism and the component types and the approximate scale of the supply. And the report was suppressed, Vera said. The report was classified, and the key findings were omitted from the active investigation file, Megan said. Yes. A pause on Vera's end that had a specific quality, the pause of someone whose understanding of a situation has just fundamentally changed shape. Victor Rains, Vera said slowly, is currently a senior advisory consultant to 2 active Department of Defense procurement committees. Megan held the phone and looked at the cold parking lot outside. He has been, Vera continued, for the last 6 years. His clearance was renewed 18 months ago. His background review noted a prior investigation, resolved without finding. She stopped. Megan. You named him 7 years ago, and the report disappeared. And 6 years ago he got a senior advisory position with a DoD clearance. Someone buried the report, Megan said. Someone buried the report, Vera agreed. And now Rains has organized what appears to be a coordinated attack on a special operations team and left a photograph of you at the site. He knows the report exists, Megan said. Even suppressed, it exists somewhere. And he knows I wrote it. She thought about this. He always knew. The report was suppressed, not destroyed. Someone told him what I'd found and then made the file go away. He's been aware of me for 7 years. Then why now? Vera said. It was the question Megan had been constructing the answer to since she'd seen her own face on that tablet screen in the EOD truck. Because something changed, she said. Something in the last 6, which is when the photograph was taken, changed his calculation. She looked at the parking structure across the lot, at the level from which the photograph would have been taken. Or someone changed it for him. Something happened that made him feel exposed. That made him decide that the risk of leaving me operational was greater than the risk of this. She gestured at everything that had happened in the last several hours. Attacking a SEAL team, leaving evidence. All of this is not the behavior of someone who has been managing his exposure carefully for 6 years. This is the behavior of someone who is reacting. Vera was quiet for a moment. I need to make some calls, she said. High-level calls. Tonight. I know. This is going to get complicated. I know that too, Megan. Vera paused. The case from 7 years ago. If we reopen it officially, with what we now have as a predicate, and if Rains has the connections that allowed him to get a DoD advisory role despite being in your suppressed report, then the people who buried the report are going to know we're coming. Some of them may still be in positions where they can interfere. Yes, Megan said. Are you prepared for that? She thought about the 4 names on the list she didn't let herself think about the nursing station and the terrible coffee and 4 years of being a bottleneck in human form. About the machining signature she had recognized in the light of a trauma bay at midnight, and everything that recognition had opened up. I've been prepared for it for 7 years, she said. I just didn't have anything to open it with. See me? She was still looking at the parking structure when Hayes appeared at her elbow. His face had the specific quality of controlled urgency that she had already learned to read, as bad news delivered professionally. Ms. Calloway, he said quietly, we just received a transmission from Commander Vera. I'm on the phone with her, Megan said. Then she just got the same information we did. Hayes looked at her steadily. Victor Rains was flagged by a routine DoD access log 40 minutes ago. Someone tried to pull your full service record, your unredacted file, including the classified attachments. The request was denied, but it was logged. He paused. The request was flagged because it was entered under Rains's credential signature. On the phone, she heard Vera stop moving, heard the quality of the silence change. He's looking for what you know, Vera said. He already knows what I know, Megan said. He's looking for what I can prove. A pause, which means, Vera said, he's already decided what he's going to do next. The fluorescent lights of the nursing station buzzed faintly above Megan's head. Somewhere down the corridor, a monitor alarm fired and was silenced within 2 seconds. Hayes was watching her. Morales had appeared from the far end of the hall, moving with a quiet purpose that suggested he had also received for whatever Hayes had received. Megan looked at the parking structure one more time. The upper level was dark. The lights on that level had been on when she'd arrived tonight. She was certain of that because she'd noticed them from the ambulance bay, the familiar yellow wash of the structure's overhead lighting. They were off now. Every light on the upper level was off, and the structure had been in her line of sight for the last several minutes, and she had not seen anyone turn them off. Which meant either they had failed simultaneously, or someone had turned them off from inside. Vera, she said, I need you to send someone to the parking structure adjacent to this hospital right now. Why? The window in front of her, the one she had been standing at, looking out over the ambulance bay for the last several minutes, exploded inward. The sound came after, The way sound always comes after, when something moves faster than it. Glass across the floor, across her arm, one piece catching her cheekbone hard enough to open the skin. Hayes moved first, 3 feet in a fraction of a second, hitting her low and taking them both to the ground behind the nursing station counter. Morales was yelling something into his radio. The second shot hit the wall above where she had been standing. The third hit the window frame, and the fourth was already in the wall of the family waiting room before the echo of the first had finished. The nursing floor went from ordinary midnight, quiet to chaos in the span of a breath. Alarms, shouting, the sound of staff hitting the floor, doors slamming in the reflexive self-preservation response of people who had not trained for this and were running on instinct. Hayes had her flat on the ground behind the counter, his body partially over hers, his radio in one hand and his sidearm in the other. His mouth was at her ear. Stay down, stay flat. Do not move. She could hear Vera's voice from the phone, which was somewhere on the floor, near her hand, small and sharp and very fast, issuing instructions she couldn't fully make out over the alarm system. She stayed flat. She pressed her hand against her cheekbone, where the glass had opened it, and felt the warm, specific acknowledgement of a wound that was not serious but was absolutely real. And she thought, with the strange clarity that extreme situations sometimes produce, that Victor Raines had just made the last miscalculation he was going to get, because she was still alive. And the moment Hayes' team secured this floor, and Vera made her high-level calls, and the Vera made her high-level file became part of an active federal investigation rather than a classified suppressed document, Victor Raines' careful 6-year construction was going to come apart, and the only person alive who could testify to exactly what he had built, and how and why 4 soldiers had died so that he could build it, was the woman currently bleeding lightly onto the linoleum floor of the Harwick Regional Nursing Station. 5th shot, then silence, then the sound of Morales on the radio, calling it in, his voice absolutely level. And then, from somewhere in the hospital, from the direction of the surgical suite at the far end of the building, a different alarm began to sound. The surgical alarm was not a code blue. Megan understood that within 3 seconds of hearing it, because code blues had a specific tone sequence she had memorized in her first month at Harwick Regional. And this was not it. This was a facility security alarm, the kind triggered by a door breach or an unauthorized entry, and it was coming from the corridor that connected the main surgical suite to the service elevator on the building's east side. Hayes heard it too. He was already repositioning, pulling her further behind the nursing station counter, his radio active and close to his mouth. Morales, east corridor, surgical level, go. Morales was moving before Hayes finished. The sound of his boots on the tile, fast, deliberate, disappeared around the corner toward the stairwell. What's on that floor? Hayes said to Megan. Surgical suite, 2 recovery rooms, a supply corridor, and the service access for the east elevator. She pressed her hand harder against her cheek. The bleeding was slowing. And whatever room Marcus is in right now. Hayes looked at her. The calculation in his face was fast and visible. Stay behind this counter. I'm not going anywhere. He moved toward the stairwell. Megan stayed low behind the counter for approximately 15 seconds. Then she assessed the situation with the specific pragmatism of someone who has been told to stay put many times in her life and has learned to evaluate each instance individually. The shots through the window had stopped. She could hear Vera's voice on her phone, which was on the floor 2 feet from her, still connected, issuing instructions she could not fully make out. The nursing floor staff were down behind their positions throughout the floor, most of them doing exactly what they should be doing, which was nothing that would make themselves visible. Picked up her phone. Vera, I'm here. Are you hit? Glaface. Not serious. She was already moving, low, toward the supply room that connected to the internal stairwell, not the main stairwell Hayes had taken, but the nurse service access stairs that ran along the building's interior and came out 2 doors down, from the surgical suite recovery corridor. Someone has entered the building. East side, surgical level. My people are moving. Stay where you are. Marcus is on that floor. A pause. Megan, I'm not armed, and I'm not going to do anything that requires being armed, she said. But I know this building and your people don't. Tell me what you need. Another pause, shorter. Where's the service stairwell exit on the surgical level? East end of the recovery corridor. There's a fire door. It takes a key card from outside, but releases from inside. If someone came up the service elevator, they would have exited directly into the recovery corridor. Can you get to the recovery corridor from another route? Surgical suite has a secondary access from the supply corridor on the west side of the floor. You have to go through scrub-in to get there, but the door to recovery is at the far end. Go, Vera says, but you do not engage. You locate and you relay. Nothing else. Megan was already in the service stairwell. The stairs were narrow and poorly lit. At this hour, the emergency lighting casting a yellow that made everything look slightly wrong. She went up 2 floors fast and pushed through the fire door at the surgical level into the supply corridor, which was lined with metal shelving and smelled of antiseptic and package equipment. She moved through it to the scrub-in room, pushed through the next door, and came out into surgical suite's secondary access hall. She stopped. There was a sound from the recovery corridor on the other side of the suite's internal wall. Not a voice, not movement. A specific mechanical sound, the sound of a door handle being tried, slowly, carefully, by someone who was trying not to make noise and was not quite succeeding. Recovery Room 2 was on the other side of that wall. Recovery Room 2 was where the post-surgical patients would be taken, where Marcus would be if the surgery had completed. Keyed her phone. Recovery Room 2, she said, barely above a whisper. Someone is trying the door. She heard Vera relay it. Heard the response come back. Morales was on the floor, coming from the east end 40 seconds out. Hayes was behind him. 40 seconds was a long time. The door handle sound stopped. Then she heard the door open anyway, the soft click of a latch disengaging, which meant whoever was on the other side either had a key card or had bypassed the lock, and neither option was good. Megan looked at the surgical suite around her. The room was laid out in the standard configuration she knew from 4 years of working in proximity to it, the main operating table at center. The equipment positioned on the right side, the instrument trays covered and staged. For the next procedure, the scrub sink against the left wall. On the supply shelf immediately to her right was a standard trauma kit, sealed, and next to it, a rack of surgical instruments, still in their sterilization pouches. She picked up the sealed trauma kit. It was hard-sided, approximately 40 centimeters long, and weighed about 4 kilograms. It was not a weapon. It was also the nearest solid object. She moved to the door that connected the surgical suite to the recovery corridor and looked through the small, reinforced glass panel set into it. The recovery corridor was long and narrow, with 4 doors on the right side, the recovery rooms and the service elevator at the far end. The service elevator doors were open. The corridor's emergency lighting was on, which meant the main panel for this section had been disabled, probably from the elevator mechanical room, she thought, which was accessible from the service shaft. A man was standing outside Recovery Room 2. He was not in uniform. He was dressed in civilian clothing, dark jacket, the same category of unremarkable clothing worn by people who need to move through spaces without being looked at directly, and he had a tool in his hand that she couldn't fully identify at this distance. He was working the door panel, not the handle, the electronic panel beside it, the access reader, with something that was not a key card. He was bypassing it. It was approximately 30 meters from her door. Keyed her phone. I have a visual. Male, civilian clothes, dark jacket, bypassing the access panel on Recovery Room 2. He has a tool, not a weapon, bypass device. He's at the panel right now. Hold your position, Vera said. He's going to have the door open in about 15 seconds. Morales is 10 seconds out from the East End. She looked at the man. He was focused on the panel, the specific focused attention of someone doing a technical task under time pressure, not scanning the corridor the way someone would if they thought they were being observed. He had not seen her through the door panel. The reinforced glass was dark from this angle. Counted. At 7 seconds, the panel light went from red to green. She saw it clearly, the small indicator light on the reader changing, and the man's posture shifted with the particular relief of a task completed. He reached for the door handle. Morales came through the east fire door. The man turned fast, and he was not as surprised as he should have been, which told her he had been expecting an eventual response, had been working against the clock from the moment he entered the building, and had not expected to be invisible indefinitely. He went for something at his jacket, and Morales covered the distance between them in a time that was genuinely remarkable to witness, and the sound that followed was brief and conclusive. And then Morales had the man on the floor of the recovery corridor with one knee in his back and was already cuffing him before Hayes appeared at the corridor's west end. Megan pushed through the connecting door. "He got the panel open," she said, moving past Hayes toward recovery room 2. "I need to check this room." Hayes didn't stop her. He was on his radio, relaying the situation, watching Morales. She pushed the recovery room door open. Marcus was there. Post-surgical, intubated. Monitors running, an IV tree with 3 lines, and a nurse crouched beside the bed who had gone absolutely white. The nurse, a young man Megan knew slightly, worked occasional overlapping shifts with. Named Terrence looked at her with the expression of someone who had been hiding in a corner of a room for an indeterminate period and was not certain this was over. "He okay?" Megan said. Terrence looked at the monitors. "Vitals are stable. He hasn't been touched." She looked at Marcus. The surgery had apparently gone as well as it could. The ventilator was running. The monitors were showing what they should show for a post-operative patient at this stage. And Dr. Farrow's work, wherever he currently was, appeared to have held. She stood there for a moment in the recovery room with the monitors and Terrence's unsteady breathing and the sound of Morales in the corridor, and she thought about the man on the floor outside and the bypass tool and the recovery room door that had almost opened all the way. This had not been about the devices at the training facility. The devices were the first move, drawing the response, identifying her, locating her through the response. The photograph on the phone was the second move, confirming she was active, that she had made calls, that she had been recognized as a threat to the cover story that had protected Victor Raines for 7 years. And then the shots through the hospital window, and this man with his bypass tool had been the third move. Not an attack on a SEAL team. An attack designed around her. She walked back into the corridor. The man on the floor was being kept exactly where he was by Morales, who appeared to require no assistance with this. Hayes was on the phone. She looked at the man's face, mid-40s, unremarkable features, the particular blankness of expression that people adopt when they have decided not to give anything away. "Who sent you?" she said. He said nothing. "The building you came from, the access you had, the bypass tool, the timing, none of that is improvised," she said. "Someone planned this. Someone who knew this hospital's layout, this floor's access system, this patient's room assignment." She crouched to his level. "That information doesn't come from nothing. Who provided it?" He looked at the floor. She stood up. It was a reasonable response from someone trained not to talk under these conditions. She hadn't expected differently. Vera arrived on the floor 14 minutes later. Came through the east fire door with 2 additional personnel. Megan hadn't seen before, older, suited, carrying the specific bearing of people who operated in offices rather than in the field and were here because the situation had escalated to their level. She looked at the man on the floor, at Morales. at Megan's face where the glass had opened the skin, at the recovery room door. Processed all of it in approximately 10 seconds. Room secure, she said. Patient is stable, Megan said. He was targeting this room specifically. He had building access information and a panel bypass device. He knew the room assignment. Room assignments are internal hospital data, Vera said. Yes, which means someone inside this hospital's administrative system provided that information, or someone with access to that system externally, Megan said. The hospital system connects to the insurance authorization network. Authorization network has vendor access points. Vera looked at her. You know this how? I filed 3 complaints about the access security on the patient data system in the last 8 months, Megan said. The administration told me I was overstating the risk. So, something moved across Vera's face that was between exasperated and impressed. She turned to one of the suited personnel, an older man with gray at his temples who had introduced himself to no one, and said, I need a forensic pull on this hospital's administrative access logs. Tonight. Full chain. The man nodded and stepped away with his phone. The man on the floor was taken into federal custody within the hour. He did not speak. His fingerprints returned results that required a higher clearance level to view than Morales possessed, which told Morales something and told Vera considerably more. She relayed that information to Megan in a corridor outside the recovery floor at approximately 2:30 in the morning, in the same direct manner she had used for everything else. He's a contractor, Vera said. Private security background, former military employment history that's been restructured twice in the last 3 years. His current employer of record is a shell company registered to a holding group. She paused. The holding group connects to the same Delaware contractor structure as the camera that took your photograph. Raines's network, Megan said. Raines's network, Vera confirmed. He sent 3 operations tonight. The devices at the training facility, the shots through the hospital window, and this man. The devices drew you out and identified you as active. The shots were either meant to kill you or to drive you into the building away from external support. And this man was the contained option, quiet, targeted, designed to look like a patient complication if it worked. He was going to kill Marcus, Megan said. He was going to kill a witness, Vera said. Marcus is the only member of that SEAL team who was present for the initial detonation. He's the primary witness to the physical circumstances of the attack. Without his testimony, the devices become harder to connect to an intentional act. She paused. And without your testimony, the manufacturer's signature identification becomes a dead end. So Raines was trying to remove both tonight. That's our working assessment. Megan leaned against the wall. She was tired in a way that had moved past the physical into something more fundamental, the specific form of vigilance for 7 years that had just been confirmed in the worst possible way as necessary. She had spent 4 years at Harwick Regional, being invisible, being manageable, being the nurse who asked too many questions, and it had not been enough. The photograph had been taken 6 days ago. She had been visible longer than she'd known. What changed, she said, 6 days ago? What changed that made Raines decide to move now? Vera had been waiting for this question. Megan could tell from the way she answered it, prepared, not searching. 18 days ago, Vera said, a routine audit of historical procurement records flagged an anomaly in a defense contract from 8 years ago. The anomaly was flagged because a component specification in the contract matched a specification in an active terrorism financing investigation. The audit was conducted by a junior DoD analyst who didn't know what she had. Vera paused. The anomaly was Raines's diversion mechanism, the one you identified in your original report 7 years ago. Megan said nothing. The audit was internal, Vera continued. But Raines has been on DoD advisory committees for 6 years. He has relationships inside the auditing structure. Someone told him the flag had been raised. He didn't know it was a junior analyst who hadn't connected it to anything yet. He thought an active investigation was opening. And he panicked, Megan said. He made a series of decisions very quickly, Vera said. He surveilled you. He planned the training facility operation. He moved within 12 days of receiving the tip. She looked at Megan steadily. His plan was to destabilize the investigation before it started, remove the witnesses who could corroborate the original evidence, create a crisis at the base that would require immediate attention, and use your involvement in the response to implicate you rather than him. The same play, Megan said. Exactly the same play as 7 years ago. Make it look like my failure. Exactly, Vera said. Federal investigation moved with a speed that Megan associated with situations where the people conducting it understood clearly that delay carried its own consequences. By 4 a.m, 2 additional federal agents had arrived at Harwick Regional and were working through the administrative access logs with the hospital's overnight IT administrator, who was not pleased about being called in but was cooperative. By 5, they had identified 3 external access events in the patient data system over the previous 18 hours, all from vendor credentials, all accessing records for patients admitted through the trauma bay. All 3 accesses had occurred after Marcus's admission. Someone had been watching the intake system in real time, tracking the patient through the administrative pipeline to get his room assignment. The vendor credential traced to a legitimate medical supply company whose system had been compromised 6 weeks prior. The compromise had not been reported. Medical supply company's cybersecurity contractor, the firm hired to manage their network security, was a subsidiary of a technology group with a board member who was a former colleague of Victor Rains from his defense contractor years. It was not a straight line. It was never a straight line. It was a series of distances that had to be walked one at a time, each step generating the next, the full picture assembling itself the way these pictures always assembled themselves, through the accumulation of specifics that individually meant little and collectively meant everything. Megan sat in a conference room on the administrative floor and answered questions for 2 hours. She told them about Casket Run, about the manufacturing signature, about the diversion mechanism she had identified in her original report, about the 4 names she said them aloud, which she had not done in years, and the effort of saying them was different than she expected, less devastating and more necessary, like finally reading aloud something that had been sitting in her chest unspoken, about the suppressed report and the official determination that had ended her service. 7 years at 2 nursing positions, 4 of them at Harwick Regional, being careful and quiet and certain she had imagined the scope of what she'd seen. She had not imagined it. 2 federal agents across from her, a woman named Hargrove and a man named Salsas, both from a joint DoD-DOJ task force that Vera had apparently activated through her high-level calls, did not tell her she was exaggerating. They did not ask her to reconsider her characterization of the suppressed report. They asked specific questions and wrote down specific answers and treated her account with the factual weight it deserved. It was a disorienting experience. At 7 a.m, Vera came into the conference room and told her they had located Victor Rains. He had not fled. That was the first thing she said. He was at his registered address in Colorado Springs, a house he owned, which struck Megan as either confidence or stupidity, and she couldn't determine which. Federal agents were in position. The arrest was pending final authorization from the DOJ attorney coordinating the case, who was on a call with a federal judge regarding the warrant. Evidence chain from the devices alone is strong enough, Vera said. The manufacturing signature from the Range 1 fragment connects to a tooling specification in Rains's original defense contract from 9 years ago. Component specification, the one your original report identified. The one that was supposed to be buried, Megan said. The one that was classified but not destroyed, Vera said. Because classified documents don't get destroyed. They get stored. And stored documents eventually get audited. She paused. Hargrove's team found the original file 3 hours ago. Your full report. Original submission, unredacted, with all the attachments. Been sitting in a classified archive for 7 years. Megan looked at her. Your report was correct, Vera said. All of it. The diversion mechanism, the component types, the network structure, the supply chain. All of it is corroborated by what we've recovered from the Range 1 and Range 2 devices tonight. She said it plainly, with the directness she had used for everything. You were right 7 years ago, and someone buried the report to protect Rains. The words sat in the air between them. Megan had spent 7 years with those words somewhere in the back of her mind. Formless, unconfirmed, present in the way that things are present when you know them to be true, and have no way to prove it, and have learned to live alongside the uncertainty. Hearing them said aloud, confirmed, by a federal commander standing in a hospital conference room at 7 in the morning, it was not the relief she might have imagined. It was something quieter and more complicated. The specific weight of being right about something that had cost this much. Who buried it? She said. We're working on that, Vera said. The classification upgrade on your report was authorized by a senior intelligence officer who retired 3 years ago. Coordination between that upgrade and Rains's subsequent DoD advisory appointment is going to take time to fully map. Predicate is there. She looked at Megan steadily. Megan, the people who did this are going to be held accountable. Going to take longer than tonight. But the predicate is there. Megan nodded. She was looking at the window of the conference room. Outside, Fort Aldrin was waking up, early morning light coming over the foothills, the parking lot filling with the first shift arrivals. Everything ordinary and sequential in the way mornings are ordinary, even after nights that aren't. Somewhere in this building, Marcus was in recovery and his vitals were stable. Somewhere in the building, the man who had tried to bypass the recovery room door was in a federal agent's custody. In Colorado Springs, Victor Rains was at his registered address, and federal agents were in position, and a judge was reviewing a warrant. And in a classified archive that had been sitting untouched for 7 years, her original report was exactly where she had written it, exactly as she had written it, waiting for someone to finally open the file. Her phone buzzed on the table. An unknown number, which she would not have answered under ordinary circumstances, and answered now because ordinary circumstances had not applied since 11:47 the previous night. Ms. Calloway. The voice was male, older, with the smooth professional register of someone accustomed to the telephone as an instrument of negotiation. My name is not something I'm going to give you, but I think you and I should speak before this morning gets further along. She looked at Vera. Vera had gone still. Why, Megan said. Because Victor Rains has documentation, the voice said. Specifically, documentation that was prepared some years ago as an insurance measure. Documentation that names individuals in positions of current authority who were aware of the report's suppression and who facilitated his continued clearance. A pause. That documentation surfaces as part of an arrest proceeding. The consequences will extend considerably beyond Rains himself. There are people who would prefer an arrangement that limits that exposure. And you're calling me, Megan said, because you're the one who opened this, the voice said, and because you're the one who can close it cleanly. She held the phone and said nothing. What they're offering, Vera said quietly, reading her face is a deal. Rains cooperates, the documentation stays contained, and certain people stay out of the inquiry. Megan looked at the window, at the ordinary morning outside. She thought about the 4 names she had said aloud an hour ago, for the first time in years. About the family waiting rooms she had passed on this floor every shift for 4 years. About the report that had been right and buried, and was right regardless of its burial. "Tell me something," she said into the phone. "If I can," the voice said. "People who facilitated Raines's clearance, the ones who buried the report." She kept her voice flat. "Were any of them involved in the procurement decisions that put those devices in a network that killed 4 soldiers?" Silence. "I'll take that as a yes," she said. She looked at Vera. Vera was watching her with an expression that was not directing her, not telling her what to do, not implying a preference. Just watching. "Then no," Megan said into the phone. "There's no arrangement." She ended the call. Vera looked at her for a moment. Then she looked at Hargrove, who had appeared in the doorway at some point, and said, "Trace that call." Hargrove nodded and stepped back into the hall. Vera looked at Megan. "That call means there are people in this who are afraid," she said. "And afraid people do things that make investigations more complicated." "I know," Megan said. "Are you sure about this?" "Someone tried to kill me twice in the last 6 hours," Megan said. "And someone buried a report that was right. Both of those things were done by people who thought I was manageable. That I would stay quiet or stay out of the way, or that the version of events they'd constructed would hold as long as I didn't have anything to open it with." She looked at Vera. "I have something to open it with now." Vera held her gaze for a moment. Then she said, the warrant came through. She was already reaching for her radio when her phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds. And her expression changed in a way that was specific and immediately readable. She lowered the phone. "Raines's house," she said. Megan waited. Federal agents arrived at the address 8 minutes ago. Vera's voice was level. Raines was there. He was cooperative. No resistance. She paused. But when they searched the property, they found a secondary structure on the lot, a workshop, detached, locked. She stopped. Inside the workshop, there's a communications setup. Active. Someone has been running transmissions from that location. The agents are going through the equipment now. "What kind of transmissions?" Megan said. "That's what they're trying to determine." Vera looked at her. "But there's something else. In the workshop, there's a secondary file, physical documents, not digital, printed and organized. It appears to be an operational file." She paused. "With your name on the cover." The conference room was quiet, except for the building's ventilation system. "Not just the photograph," Vera said. "A full operational file. Surveillance logs, movement patterns, hospital schedule, vehicle information, contact network." She held Megan's gaze. "This file goes back further than 6 days. The earliest entry is dated 3 years ago." 3 years. For 3 years, while Megan had been arriving for shifts and reorganizing supply carts and catching medication errors and being called a bottleneck, someone had been building a file on her, documenting her movements, her patterns, her contacts, her schedule. A file that had sat in a locked workshop and been updated continuously while she worked her shifts and went home and believed she had found a way to be invisible. She had never been invisible. She had simply been watched. "There's one more thing," Vera said. She was looking at the phone in her hand. "The communications equipment. The agents have identified the transmission logs." She looked up. "In the last 40 minutes, after the arrest, after we had Raines in custody, 3 outbound transmissions were sent from that equipment." "To whom?" Megan said. "They're tracing it now." Vera paused. "But the transmissions went out after Raines was already in custody, which means either Raines sent them before agents entered the property, or someone else was operating the equipment," Megan said. "Yes," Vera said. "Someone else was there. The transmissions had gone to 3 separate receiving addresses. Vera's team traced them in 40 minutes, which was fast by any standard, and suggested the task force had resources that didn't appear on organizational charts. The first transmission had gone to a server registered to a communications company in Virginia that had been under separate surveillance for an unrelated financial investigation. The second had gone to a personal device, a phone, registered to a name that meant nothing until Hargrove cross-referenced it against Raines's advisory committee contacts, at which point it meant considerably more. The third transmission had gone to an address that the trace returned as a private residence in Denver, 11 miles from Harwick Regional Medical Center. The person at that residence was named Gerald Ashby. He was 63 years old, retired from a senior intelligence analysis position 18 months ago, and had authored the classification upgrade on Megan's original report 7 years ago. He had not fled either. When federal agents arrived at his residence at 9 in the morning, he was at his kitchen table with coffee and a newspaper and the specific stillness of a person who had known this was coming and had decided some time ago how he was going to meet it. He did not resist. He did not make calls. He looked at the agent's credentials and said quietly that he wanted to speak to a lawyer, and then he said nothing else. At Raines's workshop, the agent running the communications equipment search found the transmission log in the device's buffer, all 3 messages sent within an 11-minute window, automated, pre-programmed to send on a trigger condition. The trigger condition had been Raines's arrest. He had built the transmissions as a contingency not to warn his network to run, but to send each of them a specific package of documentation. The same documentation the unknown voice on the phone had referenced. Insurance, a dead man's switch, except the man was not dead, just arrested. Yeah, and the documentation had gone out regardless, which meant the people who received it now had it, and which meant those people knew that Raines had sent it, and that federal investigators would trace the transmissions, and that their window for managing their exposure had just closed. By noon, 2 of them had contacted the DOJ task force directly through their lawyers. Megan was told this by Vera in the same conference room. Over food that someone had brought from the hospital cafeteria, the kind of institutional breakfast that existed in a category below adequate. And she received the information with the particular numbness of someone who has been awake for too long and whose capacity for surprise has been exhausted. They're cooperating, Vera said. Both of them. They're providing documentation in exchange for consideration on charges. The documentation corroborates your original report and establishes the chain of coordination that buried it. She poured bad coffee into a paper cup and set it in front of Megan. Raines built his own case against himself. 7 years ago, he had the report suppressed to protect himself. He kept the documentation that proved the suppression as insurance against the people who helped him. And last night, because he was afraid, he sent that insurance to people who were more afraid than he was. And now it's all in federal hands, Megan said. Every piece of it. Megan looked at the coffee. The 4 soldiers, she said, from the operation. Is there enough to establish that the network Raines supplied was directly responsible for the incident? Vera said. Yes. The supply chain documentation connects his diverted components to the specific device type used in that operation. It's not circumstantial. She paused. It's going to be part of the charges. Megan nodded. She picked up the coffee and drank some of it, and it was exactly as bad as she expected, and she drank it anyway because she needed something warm, and this was what was available, and not everything could be fixed tonight. That was a thought she recognized as belonging to a person who was very tired and processing something large. She let it sit. There's one more thing, Vera said. She said it with the particular intonation of someone who has been waiting to say it and has decided this is the right moment. The Army has been looped in, the JAG office. Given the evidence chain and the direct connection to Casket Run, they're opening a formal review of the operation's official record. She looked at Megan directly. Your service record is part of that review. The official determination, the one that named your assessment as the failure point, is part of that review. Megan set down the paper cup. It's going to take time, Verita said. Reviews like this always do. But the predicate is unambiguous, and the documentation is comprehensive. The official determination is not going to survive contact with what we have. Conference room was quiet. Outside, she could hear the hospital operating in its ordinary way, the sounds of a building full of people working, moving, treating, ambient evidence of a place that had been doing its function without interruption through everything that had happened in the last 12 hours. Somewhere on the surgical recovery floor, Marcus was in a monitored bed. Somewhere in the building, Duval was doing her rounds. Somewhere in Colorado Springs, Victor Raines was in federal custody in a room, without documentation or contingencies left to deploy. Okay, Megan said. It was not an adequate word for what she meant. It was the only one available. She went home at noon and slept for 11 hours. She did not dream, or if she did, she didn't remember it, which amounted to the same thing. She woke in the dark of early evening to 3 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize and one from Paulette that she called back immediately. "Marcus is awake," Paulette said. "He's been asking for you." She went back to the hospital. Marcus was in a standard room now, off the ventilator, sitting up at approximately 40 degrees, in the way that post-thoracic surgery patients sit up when full horizontal is not yet an option, but they're too alert to lie flat. He looked considerably better than he had on the trauma table 12 hours ago, which was a low baseline but still represented genuine progress. He had a cup of water with a straw that he was ignoring, and an IV line he was tolerating, and the same focused eyes she remembered from the trauma bay, now operating without the overlay of shock and blood loss. He looked at her when she came in and said, "You're the one who called the base." "Yes," she said. "You knew what the fragment was." "I recognized it," she said. "There's a difference." "Considered this." "How?" She sat in the chair beside the bed. "A long time ago, I worked a case involving that manufacturing signature. It was the kind of thing that stays specific. Most things you learn, you eventually blur around the edges. That particular pattern didn't blur." He was quiet for a moment. "My team told me what happened at the facility. The device approach vectors, the light switch trigger, the range 2 timer." He looked at her steadily. "That was you. I was working from a camera feed." "Still," he said. She didn't have a response to that and didn't construct one. "Voss is okay," he said. "He was into the secondary range when it happened. He heard the first detonation and got flat. He was far enough from the second device that when it activated, he stopped. He's okay." "Good," she said. The others, he paused. "Nobody else was hurt because of what you did. The approach vectors, the pressure plate, the timer." He looked at his hands, which were large and scarred at the knuckles in the way of someone who had used them hard for a long time. "I've been doing this work for 11 years. I've had good support and bad support and everything in between. And I have never—" He stopped again, started differently. "You didn't know any of us." "No," she said. "You had no reason to fight that hard." She thought about how to answer that, honestly. "A man was bleeding on a table," she said. "And I recognized something that other people didn't. Fighting hard part was just following what I knew." She paused. "It's what I do." He looked at her for a moment with the expression of someone revising a category. "Vera told me about your case, the operation. What happened to your report?" She didn't respond. "I'm sorry," he said. "That's not adequate." "But I'm saying it. You don't have anything to apologize for," she said. "No," he said. "But someone does, and it sounds like that's getting sorted." "Getting sorted," she said. She stayed another 20 minutes. They didn't talk much. He was tired in the way of people who have been through surgery and she was running on the reserves of their reserves. And she was tired in an entirely different way. And sitting in companionable quiet with someone who understood something about what the last 24 hours had contained was, she found, enough. The formal review of Megan's service record was opened by the Army JADG office 19 days after the incident at Harwick Regional. She was notified by certified mail, which struck her as a particular administrative choice given everything. But she understood why the formality was important. Formal processes existed for reasons, even when they moved at the speed of institutions. The review took 6 weeks. She went to work during those 6 weeks. She covered shifts she caught errors. She reorganized the supply cart a third time. And on a Wednesday afternoon, she had a long and genuinely uncomfortable conversation with Carla Duvall that covered things neither of them said perfectly, but that both of them meant. Duvall had submitted something in writing to the nursing administration. Megan didn't know the exact content, but she knew from the way Paulette described it that it was not ambiguous. An accounting of specific incidents, a formal acknowledgement. Duvall was not a person who did things by half, and whatever she had put in writing had apparently been thorough enough that the nursing director called Megan in separately to ask how she wanted to handle the documentation. "I don't need it documented," Megan said. The nursing director looked uncertain. "There are professional implications." "I know what the professional implications are," Megan said. "I've been managing them for 4 years. I'm not interested in a formal grievance process. What I'm interested in is whether the culture in that bay is going to change." Dr. Duvall has indicated. "I know what Dr. Duvall has indicated," Megan said. "I was in the room when she indicated it. What I'm asking is a different question." She looked at the nursing director. "Is the culture going to change?" The nursing director held her gaze for a moment. "I believe so," she said. "Yes." Megan nodded. "Then that's enough." It was not entirely enough. She knew that. Change of that kind moved slowly and incompletely and frequently required ongoing pressure to sustain. But she also knew that Duvall was, at her core, someone who responded to evidence, and the evidence of the last several weeks had been difficult to categorize as anything other than what it was. She had watched Duvall process its scene in the days following the incident, the specific quality of someone running a self-examination that was not comfortable but was genuine. That mattered. Imperfect and ongoing, and not guaranteed, but it mattered. Victor Raines was indicted on 11 counts, 6 weeks, and 3 days after his arrest. The charges covered weapons trafficking, facilitation of terrorism financing, conspiracy to commit murder, 2 counts of attempted murder relating to the hospital incidents, and 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter connected to the deaths in the Casket Run operation. The legal framing of this last category had apparently been the subject of significant internal DOJ discussion, but the documentation chain from his diverted components to the specific device type was sufficient to support it. Gerald Ashby was indicted separately on charges relating to the fraudulent classification upgrade and obstruction of a military investigation. 2 additional individuals, the ones who had received Raines's transmitted insurance documentation and subsequently cooperated, were charged with lesser offenses and were testifying under cooperation agreements. The indictments were not sealed. They were filed in federal court, which meant they were public record, which meant a journalist who covered the defense industry beat picked them up within 24 hours and wrote a piece that was thorough and specific and did not name Megan by name, but described the role of a former Army intelligence analyst, currently working as a trauma nurse in Colorado with a specificity that anyone who knew her would recognize immediately. She read the piece on her phone during a break, a 12-hour shift, and thought several things about it sequentially: that it was accurate, that the journalist had done real work, that being described as a former Army intelligence analyst was technically correct and felt deeply strange, and that her phone was going to start doing things she didn't want it to do. She let most of the calls go to voicemail. She called back the ones from people she actually knew, which was a shorter list than it might have been. Called her sister in Ohio, who had known something was wrong for the last several years, without knowing what, and had a conversation that was long and imprecise and relieving in the specific way of conversations between people who love each other and have been circling something for too long. She did not call back the journalist. The formal notification from the Army JAG office arrived on a Thursday. It was a letter, several pages, dense with the specific language of official military correspondence. And it said a number of things that she read carefully and then read again. The official determination from the casket run operation had been formally vacated. The determination, psychologically, professionally, the determination had been based on an intelligence assessment that was now established to have been accurate and to have been suppressed through coordinated misconduct. Her service record had been corrected accordingly. Her separation classification had been upgraded. The Army formally acknowledged that her full assessment had been correct and that the operation's outcome was attributable to factors outside her analysis. The letter used the phrase she had spent 7 years, believing she would never see in an official document, finding of no fault. She sat at her kitchen table and read it twice more. Third time she read it, she noticed her hands were not entirely steady, which was an involuntary physical response to something she was trying to receive with composure. She allowed the unsteadiness. It was honest. Not everything needed to be managed. She thought about the 4 names. She said them again, quietly. In her kitchen, the way she had said them aloud in the conference room, not as a ritual, not as performance, just as acknowledgement. They had existed. They had been worth something. The version of events that had persisted for 7 years, the version where their deaths were attributable to a bad intelligence call, to her was gone now. Replaced not with a clean story, because there was no clean story, but with an accurate one. That had to be enough. It was not everything. It would have to be enough. The trial began 4 months later. She testified on the 3rd day. She had been told by the federal prosecutor, a composed and precisely spoken woman named Ida Farrell, that her testimony would be detailed and would be challenged, and that she should answer every question exactly as accurately as could, and leave the strategy to Farrell's office. Megan had said she understood, and she had understood, and she had done exactly that. She sat in the witness stand for 4 hours. She described the fragment in the trauma bay. She described the manufacturing signature and its origin. She described the casket run operation in the specific terms of what she had observed, what she had analyzed, and what she had reported. She described her report and its findings. She described her report and its findings. She was cross-examined by Raines's defense attorney for 90 minutes in a manner that was technically skilled and substantively dishonest. And she answered every question in the same flat, factual register she had been using since midnight on a Tuesday 3 months ago, when a Black Hawk had landed on a hospital rooftop. The defense attorney asked her at one point whether she was certain her memory of events from 7 years ago was reliable. She looked at him. "I'm certain," she said, "that my written report, which was filed contemporaneously and has been recovered from the classified archive, matches my current testimony in every specific detail." She paused. "My memory and my documentation agree. If you're suggesting I've reconstructed this memory retroactively, the documents predate any motive to do so." The defense attorney moved to another question. Farrell told her afterward in the corridor outside the courtroom that that particular exchange had been useful. Megan told her she hadn't been thinking about usefulness. She had just been answering the question. And Farrell said that was exactly why it had been useful. The jury deliberated for 8 days. Guilty on 9 of 11 counts. The 2 counts that did not result in conviction were reduced charges that had been, in Farrell's assessment, going to be difficult given the evidentiary chain, not exonerations of the conduct. Just evidentiary gaps that a jury chose not to bridge without more certainty. On the 9 counts that mattered most, the verdict was unambiguous. Victor Raines stood in a federal courtroom and heard 9 guilty verdicts, read aloud, and showed very little visible reaction to any of them, which Megan observed from the gallery, and found neither surprising nor satisfying in any simple way. She had not come expecting satisfaction in a simple form. She had come because she had spent 7 years with this man's decisions as the defining weight of her life, and she wanted to be in the room when the accounting happened. That was all. She was in the room. He was sentenced 43 days later to 26 years in federal prison. Gerald Ashby received 9 years. 2 cooperating individuals received suspended sentences and probationary terms that Megan thought were too light and was told by Farrell were the cost of the cooperation that had made the primary convictions possible, which was true and was also unsatisfying. And she allowed herself to find it unsatisfying rather than making it something it wasn't. The sentencing was reported in the same defense industry publication that had covered the indictments. This time, a different journalist wrote the piece, and this one named Megan, directly full name, current employer, former designation, and the piece was accurate, and she read it with the particular discomfort of someone had spent 4 years being invisible and was now being made visible in a way she hadn't chosen. She called Vera. "You okay?" Vera said. "I'm adjusting," Megan said. "That's different from okay." "Yes," Megan said. "It is." 3 weeks after the sentencing, Marcus walked into the Harwick Regional lobby on a Tuesday afternoon with 4 other people, the rest of his team. She understood immediately. The 4 who had been at the training facility that night, and asked the front desk to page Megan Calloway. She was told by her phone and came down from the trauma floor, still in her scrubs, because she had been in the middle of a shift and had not stopped to change, because it had not occurred to her to stop to change. They were standing near the entrance. Marcus was moving carefully. He would be moving carefully for some time. Yet, the surgery had been significant, but he was upright, and his color was good, and he was wearing civilian clothes that fit him like an afterthought. The 4 with him ranged from late 20s to early 40s, different in almost every physical respect, unified in the particular quality of attention that characterized Tuatstrect people who had trained together through serious things. They looked at her when she came off the elevator. She looked at them. Nobody said anything for a moment that was almost awkward, and then wasn't. "We wanted to come in person," Marcus said. "We talked about what to say, and we didn't come up with anything that didn't sound wrong. So we came anyway," said the one beside him, the youngest, she thought, though it was hard to tell. "And we're just going to say it was you. Everything that happened that night, the reason we're all standing here was you." Megan looked at them, at Marcus's careful posture and the scar at his collarbone that she had last seen as a wound, at the 4 faces that had been names in a federal report and were now people standing in a hospital lobby in Colorado on a Tuesday afternoon alive, which was the only important thing they had in common with each other. "I did my job," she said. "That's not," the youngest started. "I know it's not adequate," she said, "but it's true. I did my job, and you did yours. And the people who tried to make sure neither of us could do it anymore are in federal prison." She paused. "That's the whole story." Marcus looked at her for a moment with those focused eyes. "Is it?" he said. "The whole story?" She thought about the nursing station and the supply cart and 4 years of being a bottleneck in human form. Texat, about a classified briefing in a windowless room and a manufacturing signature she had carried in her memory for 7 years like a piece of glass she hadn't been able to remove. About a report filed correctly and buried carefully and sitting in an archive undestroyed because classified documents are stored, not destroyed, and eventually audited. About a fragment of gray metal under trauma bay lights at midnight and the 10 seconds she had refused to move. "The important part," she said. She shook Marcus's hand. She shook each of theirs. The youngest one started to say something else, and then didn't, which she appreciated. They left. She went back upstairs. The trauma bay was running a moderate evening load, 2 patients, 1 post-procedure and stable, 1 incoming with a query laceration that was going to turn out to be less serious than the referral suggested. Paulette was at the station. Duval was at the far end of the bay, reviewing a chart with the surgical resident. Nobody stopped. Nobody made anything of the fact that she had just walked back onto the floor. The work was continuing, as work does, as it should. Pulled her gloves from her pocket and went to the first patient. The work was not a consolation prize. That was something she had spent time understanding in the weeks since everything had resolved. In the specific way, you understand things that you have known intellectually for a long time, but haven't quite lived into yet. Being a nurse was not what she had become when the other thing ended. It was not the smaller life. The other thing had been part of who she was, and this was part of who she was, and neither one negated the other or required apology. She had known what the fragment was because of what she had been. She had been in the position to act on it because of what she had become. The line between those two things was not a fall. It was a continuation. She had spent 4 years making herself manageable, making herself small enough to fit the space she had been given. She had done it out of a kind of grief that had looked from the outside, like caution and excess of caution, a slowness, habit of finding problems. It had been caution, but it had also been grief for 4 names and a report and a version of herself. She had been told she was not allowed to trust. She trusted it now, not because a verdict had validated it, not because a letter on army letterhead had said finding of no fault, because she had stood in a trauma bay at midnight with a machining signature on trauma lights and known what she was looking at, and she had refused to move, and she had been right. And all the things that followed the devices, the testimony, the conviction had followed because she had refused to move. Before anyone confirmed it, before anyone agreed, before there was anything to open the case with except her own certainty. That certainty had always been hers. She had just needed a Tuesday night at 11:47 to remember that nobody had ever actually taken it away. The incoming patient arrived at 6:15, a teenager, 17, laceration to the forearm from a fall that was exactly as moderate as she had expected. The mother was more distressed than the injury warranted, which was also expected and also completely understandable, because that was what mothers did. Megan talked the mother through what she was doing at each step, calmly, without condescension, because that was also her job. Duval passed the bay at 6:23 and paused. She looked at Megan working. She didn't say anything. After a moment, she moved on. Small, not nothing. The teenager left at 7 with 5 sutures and the specific expression of someone who had been through something moderately unpleasant and was privately relieved it was over. The mother thanked Megan 3 times, which was 2 more times than necessary, and was still welcome. 7:30, the shift changed. The night crew came in. Megan gave her handoff, collected her bag, and walked to the elevator. In the parking lot, the evening was cold and clear, that specific Colorado winter clarity, where the air has no ambiguity in it, and the stars are ridiculous. And she walked to her car and stood beside it for a moment without getting in. She was not the woman who had spent 4 years trying to disappear. She had tried that. It had turned out that the world had no particular interest in her disappearance, that the things she knew and the skills she carried were present whether or not she gave them room to be present, and that the cost of suppressing them was borne by everyone in proximity, not just herself. She had not needed to prove who she was, not to the trauma bay, not to the investigation, not to a jury, not to any of it. She had only needed to refuse to move. She got in the car and drove home through the dark of a Colorado winter, and the stars were out, and the road was clear, and in the morning she was going to come back and do it again. That was enough. That had always been enough.